My name is Sienna Marsh, and I'm 28 years old. The night I told my family I was engaged, my own mother stood up from the dinner table and threw a glass of wine directly into my face, screaming that I had no right to get married before my sister did. I was 6 months out from my sister's own broken engagement. I spent that night in my car in a gas station parking lot, wiping wine and mascara off my cheeks with a fast food napkin, learning what my own hands do when they won't stop shaking. But here's the thing. The wine isn't the part that broke my mother. The part that broke her was the knock on my apartment door 40 minutes later, and the woman standing in my hallway wearing my exact face. What happened after that ended up in front of a judge, and what my mother offered me in that courtroom, in front of everyone, was crueler than the glass ever was. Welcome back to Calm Drama Vault, where family secrets finally come to light, and quiet strength wins the day. We tell stories about people who found the courage to break patterns older than they were. If a story like this speaks to you, drop a comment below and subscribe, because this one goes deep. In my mother's house, every morning began with an inspection. She'd stand in the kitchen doorway with her coffee, and my sister Paige and I would come downstairs, and my mother's eyes would travel over us the way a jeweler examines stones. Fast, expert, sorting. Paige got adjustments. A collar straightened, a strand of hair tucked behind her ear with 2 fingers, something that looked like tenderness and functioned like maintenance. I got a glance, one past top to bottom, and then her eyes would move on to whatever the real business of the day was. I would stand there in the hallway feeling like a package that had already been weighed and marked postage due. There was a small notebook in our kitchen drawer, spiral-bound, pale pink. Every Sunday night my mother recorded Paige's measurements in it, waist and hips, the number written down like an accomplishment. She never once measured me. For years I thought that meant I was free. The unwatched daughter who got to eat what she wanted in peace. It wasn't freedom. It was disqualification. You don't measure what you've already decided isn't going to market. I learned to read my mother's weather the way farmers read the sky. The tightness at her jaw. The exact angle she set a table. The difference between her public laugh and her real one, which I heard maybe 5 times in my entire life. That skill, reading a room for danger before the danger knows itself, is the most valuable thing my childhood ever gave me. My mother makes the most sense when you stand inside her business. Marsh Pageant Coaching opened in a strip mall outside Charleston in 2001, and I'll say this plainly, my mother has a genuine gift for it. She was Miss Low Country 1988. The sash still hangs framed behind her desk, and mothers drive in from 3 counties because being coached by Renata Marsh still means something in this part of the state. Paige competed from the time she was 5. Junior pageants, then teen, then the full circuit by 16. She has our mother's exact face, and I mean that almost literally. The same high cheekbones, the same wide-set hazel eyes. A resemblance strangers found charming, and I eventually found ominous. I worked there too, in the back, steaming garment bags, organizing entry forms, invisible. I was 8 years old, crouched behind a rack of gowns, the day a client's mother cooed over Paige practicing her walk, and asked mine how she got so lucky with her genetics. My mother laughed her public laugh and said, "Oh, we work at it. In this family, pretty is currency." The whole room laughed with her. I remember doing the math an 8-year-old does silently and forever. If pretty was currency, I was overdrawn. I had by the accounting the wrong face, and when I once asked my mother whose face it actually was, since it clearly wasn't hers, she looked at me a beat too long and said, "Not from my side." Her mouth closed like a drawer. Hold on to that. It matters more than anything else in this story. My father, Glenn, sells insurance, and for 15 years he worked evening appointments by choice. I understood why long before I could have said it out loud. Our house at 7 p.m. was a stage with 1 director, and my father had found the only exit that didn't require a scene. He loved us in quiet tenses. A plate left in the microwave with a sticky note in his small handwriting. My car's oil changed on a Saturday morning with no one ever seeing him do it. When my mother's inspections ran long and sharp, he'd materialize by the front door with his car keys, ready for an appointment an hour early. And sometimes his presence took the pressure out of the room, and sometimes it didn't. Either way, he left. I want to be fair to him and I want to be honest. And those are 2 different assignments. He never raised his voice, never joined in. He also never once stood in front of me. He was present the way furniture is present, warm-colored, solid, and no help. One thing, though. When I was 13, I came downstairs at midnight for water and caught him at the kitchen table with an old cigar box open. A rubber-banded stack of envelopes inside, red and blue airmail edging, handwriting I didn't recognize. He saw me see it. He didn't explain. He just looked at me a long moment and put one finger to his lips. And I nodded, because keeping quiet was the family trade, and I'd been raised in the business. I didn't learn what was in that box for 15 more years. It arrived at a dinner party instead. I got out the way a lot of unphotographed daughters get out. I became useful somewhere else. Nursing school in Columbia, then labor and delivery back in Charleston. And I found out that hospitals run on exactly the skill my childhood had drilled into me. Nobody on a delivery floor cares what your face is doing. They care that you caught a fetal heart rate drop at 3 a.m., that you heard the change in a mother's breathing from the hallway. For the first time in my life, being watchful was worth more than being watched. I met Marcus Reed when his car battery died in the hospital parking lot at the end of my double shift. I diagnosed it the way I'd read a chart. He asked over the jumper cables whether I was always this calm about everything. He's a structural engineer. He laughs with his whole chest. He keeps a running note on his phone titled, "Things Sienna was right about." When he met my mother, she assessed him in one jeweler's pass and pronounced him practical, which in Renata means no resale value. We got engaged in April. Small dinner, close friends. My mother, when I told her, went very still, the same stillness I'd seen exactly twice before in my life, and asked flatly, "Before your sister?" "You're doing this before your sister?" Because here's what being worshipped in my family actually cost. Paige was 30 and had just come out of a 5-year relationship that ended when her fiancé, 3 weeks before their own wedding, simply left. My mother had spent that entire engagement announcing it at every client consultation, treating it like a launch date. And when it collapsed, she referred to it publicly, more than once, as Paige simply needing a little more polish before the right one comes. I watched all of it, and, to my shame, mostly felt the old dull relief of the unmeasured. At least the spotlight isn't on me. Then one afternoon I saw the wiring underneath it. I'd driven Paige to her old apartment to help pack the last of her things after the breakup, and my mother met us there. And before Paige went inside to face the boxes, our mother took her by both shoulders, kissed her cheek and said, smiling at a volume only the three of us could hear, "Don't disappoint me again. Sweetheart, again." I stood there holding a roll of packing tape doing new math. Paige wasn't the lucky one. Paige was the product line. Her whole life was a launch running behind schedule, and the woman we both called Mom was the investor getting impatient. I remember thinking, clinically, nurse-brained, if this next relationship fails too, someone in this family is going to get hurt. I just assumed because the spotlight had never once swung to me that it wouldn't be mine to absorb. 8 weeks after our engagement, Marcus proposed properly, on one knee, in front of both our families at a small backyard gathering. I planned the actual announcement the way I plan a med pass, carefully, defensively in writing. I waited until my mother's own client season had wound down, because tributaries must never compete with the river. I chose a Sunday dinner at my parents' house, full table, my father home, Paige and her new boyfriend Danny there, because witnesses had always made my mother gentler. The audience was her leash. I even scripted the redirect. I wrote it on an index card. "The minute the news lands, pivot to Paige. We can't wait for you to be next." I prepared for tears, for coldness, for the spotlight swinging at me like a boom on a sailboat. I prepared for everything except the one thing I couldn't see coming. 3 hours before that dinner, while I was still deciding between 2 dresses, my mother's phone rang. It was Paige, calling from her car, and it was about Danny, and it was not good news. I knew something was wrong before I had my coat off. Reading that house is my first language, and every instrument in it was reporting weather. Paige's eyes were red under fresh concealer. Danny sat close to her with his arm along the back of her chair, less like affection than like a guardrail. My father was home, carving a chicken with the particular thoroughness he uses when he wants a job that requires looking down. And my mother was radiant. That's the tell that took me years to decode. My mother's brightness runs inverse to her weather. She was pouring wine and telling a long, sparkling story about a client's daughter, and her fork touched the plate with about 1 millimeter too much force. Click, click, like a metronome set to something coming. Every childhood alarm I own was ringing. I found Marcus's knee under the table and squeezed it. Our signal developed for exactly this dining room, meaning hold, not tonight. But Marcus was proud of us, and proud people are flammable. When my mother turned her bright beam on us and said, "And you too? You're practically glowing over there. What's going on?" Marcus's hand was already lifting his glass, his smile already breaking open. "Well, actually, we have some news. I watched it happen the way you watch a glass tip off a counter. Too far to catch. We're engaged," I said, because the sentence was already airborne whether I liked it or not, and it was mine to land. Marcus proposed last weekend. For half a second the room held its breath. Then it broke in the wrong order. Paige moved first. My sister, who had gotten the worst phone call of her breakup that very afternoon, stood up, came around the table and hugged me. Hugged me first before anyone. Her cheek wet against mine and whispered, "Oh, see." The whisper had a crack straight down the middle of it. Grief and gladness fused so tight even a nurse couldn't have separated them. I will love her for that hug until I die. My father set down the carving knife and gripped the table's edge with both hands, and his eyes were shining, and he looked at me, nodded once, which in our house was practically a declaration, and my mother rose from her chair like weather coming up off the ocean. "Today," she said quietly, and the quiet was worse than any volume. "You chose today." I started to say I didn't know about the call, which was true, but she wasn't hearing anything anymore. The stillness was over. Her voice climbed with each word, that trained pageant diction cracking apart into something raw and unrecognizable. 5 years of Paige's relationship. The engagement announced at every client consultation. The wedding that never happened. And now this. She flung her hand at me, at my left hand, at the ring. The first engagement was supposed to be hers. It has to be hers. And then she came around the table. I'm going to tell this part the way I told it later for the record, because the record is where I finally learned to keep the truth plainly in order. Without decoration, my mother came around the table fast. Marcus was rising. Danny was rising. Nobody was fast enough, because nobody at that table, not one of us, not even me, the professional weather reader, believed what was already happening. She grabbed my shoulder with her left hand and swung her right arm, sending a full glass of wine directly into my face, screaming, "You take everything. You always take everything." The glass followed the wine, clipping my cheekbone before it hit the floor and shattered. I stumbled backward into the china cabinet, hand flying up to my face, wine and something warmer running down my jaw. And somewhere very far above me the room was exploding, Marcus's body suddenly between us like a wall going up, Paige screaming, "Mom!" Danny with his arms locked around my mother, who was still surging forward, still shouting about her daughter, hers. And then a sound cut through all of it that I had never once heard in 32 years of that marriage. My father on his feet, roaring, "Renata, enough!" The room froze like a stopped film. My mother stood there in Danny's arms, chest heaving, hair loose from its pins, looking at me with blood and wine sliding down my jaw. For 1 second, something like horror crossed her face. I've replayed that second 1,000 times. Whether it was horror at what she'd done, or at who had seen it, I never got to decide, because that was the exact moment my phone started ringing in my purse across the room, and nobody moved to answer it, so it just kept going. I left. Marcus half carried me to the car, pressing a dish towel Paige had shoved into his hands against my cheekbone. We drove straight to my apartment because it was closer than the hospital, and I needed to stop the bleeding first. Needed 5 minutes to just breathe. 40 minutes after that dinner table exploded. There was a knock on my apartment door. Marcus answered it, because I was in the bathroom with a wet cloth against my face, and I heard his breath change before I heard anything else. I came out still holding the cloth to my cheek, and I stopped completely in the hallway. Standing in my doorway was a woman in her late 50s, silver hair cropped short, calm, unhurried, entirely composed. And her face, my jaw, my exact wide-set eyes, a resemblance 30 years ahead of me, standing in my own hallway, holding a duffel bag over one shoulder. I stared at her like she was a mirror that had learned to walk. "Sienna," she said gently. "My name is Diane. I'm your aunt. I think we should talk." The next 4 hours I remember in pieces. The way you remember things through adrenaline and stitches. Marcus drove me to urgent care, where they cleaned and closed a small cut near my eye with 3 sutures. And the whole time Diane sat quietly in the waiting room, because I'd asked her to wait. Because some part of me needed to look at her a while longer before I let myself believe what my face already knew. When we finally got back to the apartment near midnight, Marcus made tea nobody drank, and Diane sat across from me at our small kitchen table and told me the truth in the calm, unhurried voice of someone who had been carrying it a long time. She was my mother's older sister, cut off, disowned, name removed from the family photo albums in 1992, when Diane was 26 and my mother was 23. Diane hadn't come home for holidays in over 3 decades. She'd built a quiet life 2 states away as a ceramics teacher, and the only thread connecting her to our family was a cigar box of unanswered letters my father had kept hidden since before I was born. "Your father called me 9 days ago," Diane said. "He said there was a dinner coming, and he had a bad feeling, and he wanted someone in the room who'd stood up to Renata before. He asked me to just be nearby. Insurance, he called it." I sat there holding an ice pack against my stitches, absorbing that my quiet, furniture-like father had made a phone call none of us knew about, had reached across 30 years of silence to protect me from something he apparently sensed coming. "Why did she cut you off?" I asked. Diane was quiet a long moment. "Our mother, your grandmother, ran girls through pageants the way some families run cattle through auction. I was the older one, the one who didn't photograph as well. I was graded every morning at breakfast. Posture, skin, waist. Your mother was the fair copy. I was the rough draft. So at 26, I left. I said no to the whole machine. And in this family, saying no to the machine means you disappear from every photograph." She reached into her bag and set a photograph on the table. A Polaroid, 1988, edges gone soft with age. 2 young women standing in front of an old station wagon. One is my mother at 20, already polished, already posing, smile aimed straight at the camera like a spotlight. She is not touching the other woman. The other woman is 23, laughing at something off-frame, denim jacket, and she has my face. Mine. Not similar. Mine. "That's the last picture of us together," Diane said. "Keep it. It goes where this whole story goes." You might think a woman who threw a glass at her own daughter's face in front of 5 witnesses would go quiet for a while. You'd be thinking of a different woman. By Wednesday, my mother had a narrative in circulation, and it was elegant, because her work always is. Sienna had a little accident at dinner, poor thing. Tripped and caught the edge of the table. And now with the wedding stress and, well, she's always been a bit dramatic when she doesn't get her way. She deployed it through the studio the way you'd run a wire service. Her clients, her hairdresser, the neighbors. My great-aunt in Beaufort texted me a prayer hands emoji and the words, "Please don't tear this family apart over a misunderstanding. Honey." A woman I'd babysat for years earlier stopped me at the grocery store, gripped my forearm and said she was praying for my whole situation, with a little pause before situation, like tongs picking something up. That's how it works in a town where your mother coaches half the pageant girls within 30 miles. Her version got fitted. Mine stood there off the rack. I want you to know what I did about it, because it's the part I'm proudest of. Nothing loud. No posts, no confrontations in the family group chat. The unmeasured daughter had one advantage her whole life. She'd learned to work quietly with documents. I requested my complete urgent care records. Imaging. The nurse's notes. The physician's blunt clinical sentences. I printed 3 copies. 2 went into our fire safe, and the 3rd went into a manila folder on the kitchen counter, next to a phone number the attending physician had quietly given me before we left, a legal advocate who worked with domestic violence cases. On the folder, Marcus wrote in Sharpie, "When you're ready." My mother came to the apartment 9 days after the dinner, unannounced, carrying a garment bag. I watched her through the peephole first. The way she'd repinned her hair. The way she'd chosen her second-best pearls. Costume for a role called Gracious Mother Extends an Olive Branch. A week earlier, I'd have felt my stomach drop with hope. That reflex was gone. The Polaroid had burned it out. Once you've seen the show from the wings, You can't unsee the stage marks. I brought you something, she said, warm as a client consultation, unzipping the bag. A wedding dress sample, ivory silk, easily $800. You'll want to look put together for whatever comes. People are talking, you know how they talk. Every word placed. Every word doing two jobs. Not one syllable of apology. No verb anywhere in her visit that admitted an action had occurred. The closest she came was a masterpiece I wrote down afterward, so I'd never gaslight myself about it. Things got so out of hand at dinner, and I hate that for us. Things got as if the glass had been weather, as if we'd both simply been rained on. I stood in my doorway with a small bandage still taped near my eye, and I did something I had never once done in 28 years. I watched my mother work, saw the technique, and declined the merchandise. I'm not taking the dress, Mom. A pause. One blink, recalculation, then frost. I see Diane's gotten to you. She always was poison. She walked to her car with her spine perfectly straight, and I noted, nurse-brained, that she never once asked how my face actually was. Not that visit. Not ever, to this day. Marcus found me at the kitchen table at 1 a.m. a few nights later. Laptop open, the manila folder beside it, filling in the state's protective order petition, stalling on the box where you describe the respondent's relationship to petitioner. Mother. The cursor blinked in that white box like a monitor tone. He didn't hover, and he didn't push. He pulled a chair beside me, read the form for a minute, and asked the exact right question, which is his gift. What do you need to hit file? I said it before I knew it was true. A witness who isn't married to me and isn't my father. Someone the town can't wave off as my team. Because I could already hear the studio's version. The husband would say anything. The father's gone soft. The aunt's a poison. I needed the impossible witness. I needed the person the whole county believed my mother loved most. We sat with that, both of us knowing the ask was obscene. She was grieving her own broken engagement. She was the star of the show. She'd spent 30 years earning her spot, and it was the only currency she had. I closed the laptop. I can't ask Paige to burn her whole life down for me. Maybe stop deciding for her, Marcus said quietly. Your family's very good at that. And as if the universe had been waiting on its cue, my phone lit up on the table between us. Paige, 3 texts stacked, time-stamped 1:14 a.m. File it. See, I'll testify. I'm so tired. You have no idea how tired I am of this family. Paige came over the next evening, and my sister and I had the first true conversation of our adult lives at my kitchen table over decaf she kept forgetting to drink. I had spent childhood believing she lived in the sun. She spent it turns out, living under a heat lamp. She told me things in a flat, careful voice, like someone unpacking a box they'd taped shut years ago. The Sunday measurements I knew about. What I didn't know was that it never stopped. 30 years old, and our mother still commented on her waist at the studio, in front of clients, with a little laugh that made it sound like hospitality. That Mom had once scheduled a difficult conversation about Danny around the studio's competition calendar because that weekend's showcase needed Paige photographable, and when Paige objected, Mom sweetly reminded her who had paid for her coaching for 2 decades. That "don't disappoint me again" wasn't a slip you overheard once, Paige said, turning her mug in slow circles. It was a liturgy. You always thought I was the favorite, Si. I was the display model. And a display model isn't loved. It's dressed. You at least gotta be a person back there in the stockroom. We both cried a little, in the undramatic way of people who don't have spare energy for more. And then my sister, my worshipped, gilded, exhausted sister, picked up the manila folder, read the medical summary all the way through, set it down, and said the thing that ended one family and started another. She hit the wrong daughter, and she's going to call it love. She's been calling it love my whole life. I'll say that to a judge in those exact words. We filed on a Tuesday morning. The petition, the medical records, and 3 witness statements. Marcus's, Paige's, and one more that I will be proud of until the day I die. My father's. He wrote it at our kitchen table in his neat insurance agent print, and his hand shook worse than his handwriting. When he signed it, he sat back and said to nobody in particular, 32 years married, first time I've testified against her. Then he squared the pages the way I square papers, apparently an inherited habit, and added, should have been 30 years ago. The court granted the emergency order the same day. That's how it works when there's a medical record and a fresh act of violence. A full hearing was scheduled a few weeks out, both sides to be heard. And here's a detail I did not choose and could not have staged. Orders have to be legally served on the respondent. And the sheriff's deputy found my mother where anyone could at the studio on a Saturday mid-consultation with a client. I wasn't there. I heard it third hand, how she took the papers with a bright hostess smile in front of a competing family's whole entourage, thanked the deputy as if he'd delivered flowers, and finished the consultation flawlessly. That's my mother. The show must, and did, and will always go on. People ask if that part felt like winning, the papers landing in her kingdom in front of an audience. It didn't feel like anything so warm. I stood in my kitchen when I heard, one hand pressed against my healing stitches, doing the only accounting that mattered. 12 days out, wedding still 6 months away, and an enforceable piece of paper now standing where my body used to stand alone. I didn't win anything that day. I just, for the first time in my life, stopped losing. The town took sides the way small towns do, quietly, at the level of client bookings and who sat where at church. Some aunts went silent. A cousin I barely knew sent a card that just said, "Believe you," underlined twice, no signature. I keep it in the fire safe with the records. My mother hired a lawyer from Columbia, and in her boldest stroke, put a new sign in the studio's front window, hand-lettered, facing the road, "Family is everything." I drove past it once and laughed so abruptly I startled the dog in the next car. And then there was the phone call I didn't expect. My grandmother, my mother's mother, 86 now, living in assisted care outside Beaufort, the original owner of the breakfast scoreboard. Diane had visited her, first time in decades, and told her everything. The voice on my phone was thin as onion skin. "Your mother," she said, and stopped, and started again. Renata was such a beautiful girl. We made sure of it, a long breath with static in it. I watched my mother do it to me too, you know. I thought it was how you raised girls who survive. She didn't apologize. Women of her generation apologize in silences, not sentences. But before she hung up, she said, "Don't let anybody weigh your happiness but you, Sienna." And her voice cracked on happiness. That was the closest thing to amends the assembly line ever produced. The hearing was 11 days out. My lawyer's name is Rebecca Hale, courthouse gray suits, a handshake like a door closing. She prepared me for the hearing the way I'd want a surgeon to prepare. No adjectives, all sequence. Records go in, witnesses go up, the other side gets to cross. Keep every answer inside the question. At the end of our last prep session, she closed the folder, took off her glasses, and gave me the only warning that mattered. Their side has signaled they'll propose a resolution. Withdrawal of the petition in exchange for structured family counseling, supervised contact, language like that. It'll sound reasonable. Courts like reasonable. She paused, choosing the next part with visible care. And Sienna, it will come wrapped in the thing you want most. That's how these offers work on daughters. I've watched it for 20 years. Prepare yourself now, in this office, because you cannot prepare in that room. What do I want most? I asked, and I genuinely meant it as a question, which tells you how deep the thing was buried. Rebecca looked at me a long moment, not unkindly, the way you look at a smart patient who hasn't read her own chart. "You know," she said, "that night I sat on our bed with the Polaroid. I'd started carrying it the way some people carry saints. I looked at Diane laughing off frame in 1988, and at 20-year-old Renata beside her, posed, polished, alone in a way I'd never noticed before. And I said the answer out loud to the empty room because Rebecca was right, and I did know. I wanted my mother to say she loved me. 28 years, one sentence. And someone in Columbia was, at that very hour, drafting it into a settlement offer. The night before the hearing, my mother violated the order to stand on my porch. I know, technically, I should have called it in. Rebecca half expected me to and never scolded me that I didn't. Because when I looked through the peephole, I saw something I'd never seen in my life. My mother undone. No pearls, hair not fully pinned, a cardigan buttoned wrong at the bottom, which for Renata Marsh is the wardrobe equivalent of a scream. 2 minutes, she said through the door. I'll stay right here on the mat. And then my mother stood on my doormat under the porch light and told me a true thing, the first one I ever heard from her about herself. My mother weighed me every Monday morning, she said flatly, looking at the porch rail instead of me. On the scale in the cold bathroom, before school, before breakfast. The number decided the week. A pause. The year I was 16, before the state finals, she locked the kitchen for 3 days. 3 days, Sienna. I competed dizzy. I won. She framed the sash and hung it where the kitchen key used to hang. I stood there with my hand near my healed cheekbone and felt the ground tilt, because it was real. The wound was real, is real, and it explained everything, and my whole chest ached for that starving girl. And then my mother lifted her eyes, and with the same breath, cashed it in. So you know I don't mean the things that happen when I'm wound tight. Withdraw the petition tomorrow. We'll do the counseling, whatever they want. And I'll say it, Sienna. I'll say I love you. I've never said that to anyone. Not your father, not Paige, you'd be the first. There it was. The sentence I'd waited my whole life for, quoted to me in advance like a price. Good night, Mom, I said. I'll see you in court. I closed the door, and then I sat down against it and cried, because I had come so close to opening it. Charleston County Courthouse, 8:40 in the morning. A courtroom that smelled like floor wax and cold coffee. Our side of the gallery filled up in a way I hadn't dared to picture. Marcus in the tie he wears to funerals and job interviews. My father in his church suit, sitting very straight, statement folded in his breast pocket like a pass he was afraid someone would revoke. Paige, who walked past our mother's table without turning her head, in a plain navy dress I guarantee was chosen for its plainness. The display model, off-duty, on strike. And Diane, sitting on the aisle with her silver hair in my face, as calm as a woman who had been waiting 30 years for a room like this. My mother came in at 8:50 with her Columbia lawyer, entering the way she enters everything. Chin lifted, camera ready. The county's most beautiful 53-year-old woman in a deep green suit she saves for competition finals. She swept the room and won jeweler's pass. It snagged for half a second on Diane. I watched my mother see her sister, see the face, the one she'd cut out of the family albums, sitting in daylight where the whole county could compare. I watched her chin come up another degree to cover whatever had just moved underneath it. She did not look at me at all. The bailiff read the case number out loud. My name and my mother's name, welded together by the word verses. The judge, a gray, brisk woman with reading glasses on a chain, opened the file and said, "Let's begin." The evidence went in dry, and dry turned out to be devastating. The medical records on the projector, the intake note, the imaging report, the physician's flat clinical sentence, patient reports being struck by mother with a thrown glass, laceration requiring sutures, words with no adjectives in them, which meant no handholds for anyone trying to climb around them. Marcus testified in his funeral tie, steady, wrecked, precise. Then Paige took the stand, and the whole room leaned a half-inch forward, because everyone in that county knew exactly who she was. The beautiful one, the studio's face, Renata's girl. She kept her hands folded and her voice level. And she said the sentences she'd promised me at my kitchen table, almost word for word, and I watched them land on the courtroom like weather. My mother didn't lose control that night. My mother lost possession. My sister had something that was supposed to be mine, because everything about me was always supposed to be my mother's. I know how that works. I've been hers for 30 years. A pause, her chin steady. She hit the wrong daughter, and she's going to call it love. She's been calling it love my whole life. My mother's lawyer, to his credit, did not cross-examine her long. There was nothing in it for him. Instead, at the recess, he approached Rebecca with the offer we knew was coming. Respondent proposes withdrawal of the petition in favor of structured family counseling and supervised contact. Respondent is prepared to make a personal statement of reconciliation to the petitioner here today. On the record. Rebecca relayed it to me in the hallway verbatim, watching my face the whole time with those 20 years of hers. A personal statement, I repeated. Rebecca nodded slowly. You know what it's going to be. Decide out here, Sienna. Not in there. We declined the deal. And the hearing resumed, and Rebecca called Diane Marsh, and my mother's chin finally came down 1 degree. Diane testified the way she pours tea, level, unhurried, terribly clear. She hadn't been at the dinner. She wasn't there for the glass. She was there for the pattern, and the judge allowed it. and my aunt laid 3 generations on the record in 9 minutes. The breakfast gratings, posture, skin, waist, every morning. Their mother's coffee going cold because scoring took priority. The photo album purges of anyone who didn't photograph well. The assembly line that turned daughters into inventory. And then, quietly, the year my mother was 16, when her own mother locked the kitchen for 3 days before the state final so Renata would fit into the dress. She competed starving. She won starving. Her mother hung the sash next to the kitchen key. I believe on purpose. Diane looked at her sister, and her voice for the first time bent. In this family, pretty was always the currency. That was our mother's phrase before it was Renata's. My sister is the first product of that line, and I was the only one who ever got out. I'm not here because I hate her. I'm here because I know exactly what she was about to do to Sienna, because it's the only thing she was ever taught to do. I looked at my mother during that testimony. I couldn't not. She sat perfectly composed, spine of a pageant queen, eyes shining wet and unfallen. And I watched her, in the middle of her own autopsy, tilt her head 1 degree and check her reflection in the glass tabletop. Both things true at once, forever. The starving 16-year-old and the woman who became the scale. My chest ached, and my resolve did not move an inch, and I finally understood that both of those could be true at the same time. Before ruling, the judge asked whether the respondent wished to make a statement. My mother's lawyer began to answer, and my mother, for the first time in the proceedings, maybe for the first time anywhere, overrode her counsel. She stood, smoothed the green suit, and turned, not to the judge, but to me across the aisle. The courtroom went so quiet I could hear the ceiling fan tick. Sienna. Her voice caught, and what came through the catch was not performance. I have spent 28 years auditing that voice, and I am telling you, under everything, something real was drowning. I love you, Sienna. There it was, out loud, in public, on a court reporter's tape, in front of her husband and her daughters. The sentence I had waited for since before I had words to wait with. And she wasn't finished. I love you. And I don't say it, because where I come from, you didn't get to. Her hand made a small, helpless motion, and I watched her reach the very edge of the truth, closer than she had ever stood to it. And then I watched her step back, the way she always stepped back from anything real, and land where she always landed. So withdraw this order, sweetheart, and come home, and we will be a family. That's all I'm asking. You get everything you ever wanted. All you have to do is take it back. The Polaroid was in my blazer pocket, over my heart, the way a nurse keeps her pen light. The judge looked at me. Ms. Marsh? I stood up slowly and I spoke quietly, because I had learned by then that in my family, quiet is the only volume that can't be performed over. I believe you. Mom. Her face lifted, and for one terrible second it was radiant with victory. And I had to say the rest into that radiance. That's the saddest part of this whole room. I believe you love me today, here, now. That love can buy something you need. That's the only kind of love your mother ever taught you. Love with a receipt, I breathed. The fan ticked. I've watched you my whole life, and I'm telling this court the truth. You are offering me the one sentence I've wanted for 28 years, and you are offering it as a price. And I'm not buying my safety with it, because Marcus and I still have a whole life to build. And I'm not building it with a debt attached to the front door. I turned to the judge. I'm asking the court to issue the order. 2 years. She granted it in 4 unhurried sentences with findings, effective immediately. What I remember after that is mostly sound. The gavel, lighter than television makes it seem. My mother's lawyer murmuring. My mother rising, gathering her handbag, and walking out of that courtroom at pageant tempo. Chin high, heels striking the aisle tile in perfect meter. Click, click, click. The same metronome I'd heard over dinner plates my whole childhood. And not one of us, not her husband, not her daughters, not her sister, got a glance on the way past. The door shut. That sound, heels departing on tile, is the last sound of my mother I have. I sat down, and my legs finally shook, and I let them. Because the person they'd been holding up all morning was tired in a way that went bone deep. I had just watched myself decline the only sentence I'd ever wanted because it came with a price I finally recognized. And I want to be honest with you, the way this whole story has tried to be honest. It did not feel like winning. It felt like an amputation that saves the patient. It felt like the truth. It still does. In the hallway outside, my family, the elected one, the one that had voted with its presence, closed around me. My father hugged me first, and I realized, my face against his suit jacket, that I couldn't remember the last time he had initiated a hug. His statement was still folded in his breast pocket, unneeded. The records had carried the day, but he kept touching the pocket like a man confirming a passport. 30 years late, he said into my hair. I know, Sai, I know. Paige stood back until I reached for her, then gripped my hand the way she had at every difficult moment of our childhood, the railing grip. Except this time I understood what it was, and I gripped back. So, she said, wet-eyed, attempting our family's native dialect of deflection. I guess I have to learn how to be a sister now. Heard it's like being a display model, but you actually get to move. Diane took my hand, pressed the Polaroid into it, and folded my fingers over the two young women in front of the station wagon. Keep this where you'll see it, she said. My own future face looking down at me, steady as a level. Not to remember what she did. To remember where the script ends. It ends with whoever finally refuses the part. Marcus drove us home with one hand on the wheel and one hand on my knee. And nobody said anything, and it was the best silence of my life. Marcus and I got married the following spring. Small, outdoors, 30 guests. My father walked me down a short grass aisle in his good suit, statement long since retired to the fire safe with everything else. Paige stood beside me, in a dress she picked out herself for once, nobody else's calendar involved. Diane flew in from 2 states away and sat in the front row, my own face smiling up at me from a folding chair, 30 years older, and finally, entirely, present. We didn't send an invitation to my mother. I want to be honest about that, too. It wasn't cruelty. It was arithmetic. You don't invite whether you've already had to get a restraining order against. She learned about the wedding the way the town learns everything, and she responded in her native language. A gift arrived a week later, delivered through Paige, wrapped in studio packaging. A silk wrap, ivory, exquisite, easily $200. No card with a verb in it, just, "Congratulations, Renata." I held that wrap for a long moment. It was soft and beautiful, and it weighed 3 generations. Then I donated it to a shelter's clothing closet, where it will warm someone whose mother's love has no dress code attached. The studio is thriving, by the way. The family is everything sign is still in the window. Clients still drive in from 3 counties. The county still finds my mother elegant, and it isn't wrong. The machine that fed her still runs, all lights on, right there off the main road. It just doesn't run through my house anymore. On my refrigerator, held by a magnet shaped like a paintbrush, there are 2 pictures now, my wedding photo and a Polaroid from 1988. My future children will grow up knowing both women. Only one of them will ever get to hold them. Here's what I know now, 2 years out. Some of us have to grieve a mother who is still alive. And breaking the cycle doesn't feel like victory. It feels like choosing your own reflection over your mother's mirror, every single day, starting before breakfast, because that's when the grading used to happen. I don't know yet if I'll have a daughter someday, but I know this. Nobody will ever measure her. There will be no notebook in my kitchen drawer. There will be no scale in a cold bathroom deciding her week. There will be a woman in the front row with my exact face, and a father who finally learned that love means standing in front of someone, not just leaving room service in the fridge, a Polaroid with my face and a stranger's name. And I love you, spoken once in a courtroom, offered as a price I finally learned to refuse. That's my story. Now tell me yours. What's the sentence you waited your whole childhood to hear? Put it in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story stayed with you, subscribe to Calm Drama Vault, because next week asks an even harder question. Take care of yourself. That's family too.